"Do stop hovering by the wall, Beatrice, you make the whole family look desperate," said her sister Cecily, loud enough for the nearest cluster of guests to hear, and the little group tittered on cue. 26 and never once asked to dance. One begins to think there is something the matter with you. From across the ballroom, unseen by any of them, a tall dark man in severe black watched the young woman by the wall receive this cruelty without flinching, and something in his still face grew colder. Beatrice Ashcombe was the eldest of 3 daughters, and the plainest and the poorest in prospects, and her family had never once let her forget any of the 3. She had a quiet grey-eyed steadiness, a gift for figures that her father found unwomanly, and a way of standing very straight when she was wounded that the world mistook for coldness. Her 2 younger sisters had been married off in their first seasons. Beatrice, passed over year on year, had become the family's standing joke. The spinster, the shelf-sitter, the sensible one who would keep house for whichever married sister would have her when their parents were gone. Tonight, at the Marchbanks ball, she had been brought only to chaperone her cousins, and made to understand that she was not to expect to dance, and not to embarrass anyone by hoping. She did not hope. She had trained herself, painfully, out of the habit. She stood by the pillar in her plain grey silk, 3 years old, let out at the seams, the best she had, and she held her chin level and watched the dancing and did not permit her face to show one particle of what it cost her. "Poor Bea," sighed her sister Rosamond, drifting past on her husband's arm. "I do think you might have stayed home. It's rather painful to watch." The dark man across the room set down his glass. No one knew who he was. He had arrived late and alone, unannounced but for the whisper that ran the length of the room the moment he entered. Ade said, though which one no one could say. A great northern estate called Dunhollow. A man who never came to town, never danced, never courted, and had refused, it was rumoured, every matchmaking mother in 3 kingdoms. He was darkly handsome in a forbidding way, and he had stood at the edge of the ballroom for the better part of an hour speaking to no one, watching, and every hopeful girl in the room had contrived to pass before him, and he had looked at none of them. He was looking now only at the plain woman by the wall whom her own family had just called a painful embarrassment. Alaric, for that was the Duke of Dunhollow's given name, though not a soul in that room had earned the right to use it, had come to London for one purpose, and it was not to find a wife, and it was certainly not to dance. He had come on a matter of business, dry and joyless, and had been dragged to the Marchbanks ball by an old friend who insisted a night among people would do him good. It had done him no good at all. He had watched the glittering crowd with the weary contempt of a man who had long ago stopped expecting to find anything real in a room like this. The same painted smiles, the same mercenary mothers, the same daughters trained like songbirds to catch a title. And then he had noticed the woman by the pillar, not because she was beautiful, though he would come quite soon to think her so. He had noticed her because, alone in that whole heartless room, she was not performing. She stood straight and quiet and asked nothing of anyone, and when her own sisters wounded her in front of strangers, she absorbed it with a dignity that struck him like a blow, because he recognized it. He had spent his own boyhood being told, in a cold northern house, that he was not what was wanted. He knew exactly the look of a person who has been taught to expect nothing and has decided, out of pride, to survive it standing up. He watched the sister called Rosamond drift past her, that poisonous poor bee, and he watched the plain woman's knuckles whiten on her fan, and her chin lift a fraction higher, and he made up his mind. The Duke of Dunhollow, who never danced, who had refused every heiress in 3 kingdoms, set down his glass and began to walk across the ballroom. The room noticed him move before it understood where he was going. A ripple ran through the crowd. The mysterious Duke was crossing the floor, at last, toward the young ladies. Mothers seized their daughters' arms. Cecily Ashcombe straightened and put on her most brilliant smile, certain as she always was, that any man of consequence must be coming for her. Rosamond's married friends parted to clear his path. The whole glittering machinery of the marriage market turned to receive him, and the Duke of Dunhollow walked past every one of them. He walked past Cecily, whose smile faltered and died. He walked past the heiresses and the beauties and the practised debutantes. He walked the whole length of that ballroom in his severe black, with 200 people watching and not a sound in the room but the music, and he stopped in front of the plain, straight-backed spinster in the 3-year-old grey silk whom her family had brought only to chaperone the others. Beatrice looked up at him with startled grey eyes. The Duke bowed to her deep, unhurried, unmistakable bow, the bow a man makes to a woman he honours, and said, in a low voice that nonetheless carried to every straining ear in that silent room, "Forgive the liberty of a stranger. I have watched you this hour, madam, and I find I cannot bear to watch you stand against the wall a moment longer. Will you do me the very great honour of dancing with me?" For a moment Beatrice could not breathe. She was aware of her sisters' faces gone slack with astonishment, of her mother half risen from her chair, of the whole county holding its breath. She was aware, most of all, that in 26 years no one had ever asked her to dance, and that a duke, this duke, whom every woman in the room had failed to catch, was standing before her with his hand held out and his dark eyes fixed on hers as though there were no one else alive. "Your Grace," she said, low and steady, though her heart was beating so hard she thought he must hear it, "I fear you are mistaken in me. I am not. I am the eldest Miss Ashcombe, the plain one, the one they bring to mind the others. Surely you meant to ask." "I meant to ask you," said the Duke of Dunhollow, "and no one else in this room. I have been asked all evening to admire a great many young women who wished to be admired. You are the first I have seen who wished only to be left in peace, and who bore unkindness, when it came, like a queen. I have no interest whatever in the ones who perform. I should like very much to dance with the one who is real." His hand did not waver. "Will you?" Beatrice Ashcombe put her hand in the Duke's. He led her out into the very centre of the floor, where the whole room could see. And the music took them up, and he danced with the plain spinster her family had mocked as though she were the only woman in England worth dancing with, and Beatrice, who had watched from the wall for 8 long seasons, found that she knew the steps after all, and that her feet remembered what her heart had almost let itself forget, and that a man's steady hand at her waist and a man's dark eyes on her face could make the whole cruel room fall away to nothing. "Why?" she asked him quietly as they turned. "Truly. Why me, when you might have had any of them?" "Because any of them have been offered to me my whole life," said Alaric, "and I have never wanted one. I grew up in a cold house being told I was not what was wanted, Miss Ashcombe. I know the look of it on another person. I saw it on you across this room, and I found I could not walk out of here and leave you to another year of it. That is the whole truth. I did not come tonight to find a wife, but I begin to think," and here his grave face did something rare and warm, "that I may have found one regardless." Beatrice looked up at him, and for the first time in a very long while she did not measure her words for safety. "You speak as though you know exactly how it feels," she said, "to be the one no one wants. I had thought a duke could not possibly know." "A duke is a title," he said quietly. "It is not a shield against a father's disappointment, nor a mother's. I was the second son, Miss Ashcombe, until my elder brother died, and until that day I was told with great regularity that I was a burden and a plain sort of boy and a poor bargain all round. Then I inherited, and suddenly the Sapel who had scorned me could not praise me enough, and I learned at 19 the exact worth of praise that comes only with a title. It is worth nothing at all." His hand tightened briefly at her waist. "That is why I have wanted none of these women who would not have crossed a street for me had I been born without my rank. But you did not know I was anyone tonight. You did not so much as glance at me. You stood by your wall and asked nothing of the world, and I thought, there is a person who would have been kind to me when I was no one. That is the only sort of person I have ever wished to marry." Beatrice found she could not answer him at all, and so she only held his gaze as they turned, and let him see that she had understood. When the dance ended he did not release her hand. He tucked it through his arm and turned, and walked her the length of the room back toward her family, who stood in a stricken cluster, Cecily white with envy, Rosamund's mouth working, their mother groping for words that would not come. The Duke of Dunhollow stopped before them and inclined his head with glacial courtesy. "I collect," he said, "that this lady is your sister and your daughter. I heard earlier some of what was said to her by this wall, that she was desperate, that there was something the matter with her, that it was painful to watch her." His voice was perfectly pleasant and colder than the northern estate he came from. I have danced with a great many women in a great many ballrooms, and I have never met one who did not deserve better of her own blood than what I heard said to Miss Ashcombe tonight. You have spent, I gather, 8 seasons teaching this remarkable woman to expect nothing. You have wasted your time. Because she is going to be a duchess, and you are going to spend the rest of your lives explaining to everyone you know how you came to overlook her, and I do not think you will find it a comfortable story to tell. He turned from them as though they had ceased to exist, and looked down at Beatrice, and every trace of cold left his face. That is, he said gently only to her, if she will have me. I have been very presumptuous. You owe me nothing, and you may send me away, and I will go. But I should like to call on you tomorrow, Miss Ashcombe, and the day after, and every day you will permit, not because I pity you, for I do not. You are the least pitiable person in this room. But because in 1 hour against a wall, you have made every other woman I have ever met seem like a candle held up to the sun. Beatrice Ashcombe, 26, plain, poor, and mocked, looked up into the face of the Duke of Dunhollow with her chin still level and her grey eyes shining, and said, in a voice that carried just far enough for her family to hear, you may call tomorrow, your grace, and the day after, and every day you will permit. A small, slow smile. I find I have waited a very long time to be asked. He called the next day, and the day after, and every day that season, until the whole of London had ceased to speak of the plain eldest Ashcombe girl and spoke instead, in tones of wonder, of the Duchess of Dunhollow, the grave, clever, grey-eyed woman the mysterious Northern Duke had crossed a crowded ballroom to claim, and had never once, in all the long happy years that followed, looked at with anything but the astonished tenderness of a man who could not quite believe his good fortune in having found her against a wall, where her own family had left her, thinking her worth nothing at all. And Beatrice, who had learned so painfully to expect nothing, learned instead, slowly, and then wholly and for the rest of her life, what it was to be the one chosen first, and cherished most, and never again overlooked.